So now we're on to book 5 of Paradise Lost, and I really want to continue on with this theme that I'm trying to argue that eating from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil can be likened and compared to Prometheus's gift of fire, in that man's first disobedience and our urge to eat from this tree stems from our desire to learn and our desire to know, and that it doesn't have a lot to do with knowledge of good and evil. It has to do with knowledge in general, and that's Milton's interpretation of the fall of man. And I think right off the bat in book 5, we start to see evidence of this thesis. Starting with Eve's dream is really an incredible thing. So Eve is sleeping, and we remember from book 4 that Satan has managed to slip into Eden, despite the fact that Gabriel and other angels have been charged with keeping him out. He manages to get all the way to Eve's ear, and he starts whispering in her ear. And here at the beginning of book 5, we see the product of his whispering in her ear. And she begins to relate this dream. She says that she felt like she was being awakened in the middle of the night. And this voice was speaking to her, and it was a voice that she at first thought it might have been Adam. But it's not. And this is what this voice said to her. This is line 38. Why sleepest thou, Eve? Now is the pleasant time, the cool, the silent, save where silence yields to the night-warbling bird that now awake tunes sweetest his love-labored song, and now reigns the full-orbed moon, and with pleasing light, shadowy sets off the face of things. So think about already what Satan is planting in her head. And consider that in the context of the pursuit of knowledge. He's right off the bat, he's trying to suggest to her that she's missing out. She doesn't know what nighttime is like. Nighttime is better, he suggests. This night-warbling bird, tunes sweetest. The bird's song sounds sweeter at night. The moon sets off the face of things in more pleasing light. The moon makes Eden look more pleasing than the sun does. You're missing out on all these things by sleeping through the night. You need to wake, Eve. You need to wake. And she follows this, and she thinks this is an angelic figure. And she follows it to the tree of interdicted knowledge, is what she calls it. Sounds like a lot more restrictive. The tree of restrictive knowledge. And she says, wondering she looked as this angel stood beside the tree. This is line 54. And I think it's interesting that she uses the word wondering, but she doesn't really say what she's wondering, what's going on in Eve's head as she's looking at all this. And then she listens to him talking. Here we go, line 60. Is knowledge so despised? This angel asks her. Again, no language about good and evil. Pure knowledge. Is knowledge so despised? Or envy? Or what reserve forbids this to taste? What kind of envy would forbid you this? And then, having said all this, he paused not, but with venturous arm he plucked, he tasted, and in Eve, damp horror chilled her at such bold words, vouched with a deed so bold. This is right around line 65. She uses the word bold. This guy doesn't think twice. He says he's going to do it. He plucks and tastes. In one quick motion does he defy their one rule. And she's watching this, calls it a deed so bold. Can't you just picture a parenthetical here that says, and I liked it? She doesn't say a deed so awful. She says a deed so bold. And what happens next? He holds the fruit out to her. This is right around line 82. He holds the fruit that he already bit out of to my mouth, she says, of that same fruit held part which he had plucked. The pleasant, savory smell so quickened appetite that I methought could not but taste, she says. She's describing the emotions she feels as the fruit is held right to her lips. And she's quickening her appetite. The savory luster, the fruit is beckoning to her in a sensory fashion. Isn't this amazing, the way Eve is describing how she's drawn to this fruit? And I think it's also interesting that in the opening lines of book 5, that Adam is watching her sleep. And as he's watching her sleep, he notices that she has glowing cheek. He doesn't say that she has a pale face, that she looks pale and terrified. She has a glowing cheek as she's dreaming about the fruit being held right to her lips. This is amazing to me. We can reasonably wonder at whether or not Eve is sensuously aroused by this deed so bold. The fruit was held right up to my lips. And Adam's response to this is kind of, well, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Evil into the mind of God or man may come and go, he says. This is around line 117. Evil into the mind of God or man may come and go, so unreproved, and leave no spot or blame behind. Which is nice. I like this thought in general. Just by thinking something doesn't mean you did it. He's right. But I think it's interesting. Evil into the mind of, not man, evil into the mind of God or man. So even God has sick thoughts. That's quite a thing to say. And then in line 130, a tear falls from her cheek. She starts to cry. And I think there's something to be said for the fact that Eve, if this is really paradise, Eve shouldn't be having nightmares, even if Satan gets to her. Is this the Garden of Eden or not? And she shouldn't be crying either. So how blissful is this paradise? We are very much entitled to ask, I think. And so the next thing that happens is Raphael is dispatched by God to have a conversation with them. The point of this conversation, God says, is so that if they do eat from the tree, they can't argue that they didn't know what would happen. That's God's justification. So Raphael comes down to talk with them, to speak with them, and it's said that he is the most sociable of all the spirits. So he's sort of something like a Hermes. He's kind of like the messenger god. He's the sociable one. And he comes down, and there's more lines here where as Raphael comes and he's going to be their guest, Adam turns to Eve and he says to her, wait, why don't you go prepare a meal? Go prepare a meal for us. And just go, just use whatever we have in stock. And Eve has this response. We don't have a stock, Adam. This is paradise. We don't have to save food. It grows in abundance. But don't you worry. I'll go get it. And so she doesn't just have to prepare this meal. At Adam's request, she has to go out and actually gather it. In Eden, you don't save food. So she has to actually go out and gather it. How does she feel about this? We don't really know. Milton doesn't tell us anything, but she does say, line 331, dispatchful looks in haste she turns, on hospitable thoughts intent. So who knows how she views her place. An archangel comes down and she is to go out plucking. What she thinks about this, we don't know. So their conversation starts, and there's a whole bunch of descriptions here about the food. And so we move on to line 553. Adam, and this is going back to what I want to talk about, what I want to say about knowledge, and to what extent knowledge And the pursuit of knowledge is really the theme of this. It's really what is supposed to be associated with the fruit. Adam, not to let the occasion pass, given him by this great conference, to know of things above his world. Adam wants to know what's beyond. And isn't there something to be said? They're supposed to be living in ignorance. God seems to be taking no steps to preserve that ignorance if he's sending them angels to flaunt right in front of them what they're not supposed to ask questions about. That makes sense. Line 493. And how about this on line 493? Time may come. This is Raphael talking. Time may come when men with angels may participate. Oh, great. One day, men and angels might be able to participate with one another. Eventually mankind might equal angels, but it's not yet. Not yet. Don't worry about it. That's great. That helps to keep man enjoying his state of ignorance. Line 503. Meanwhile, this is still Raphael. Meanwhile, enjoy your fill. What happiness this happy state can comprehend, incapable of more. That's the end of that line. Enjoy what happiness this state can comprehend, incapable of more. Doesn't that sound a little arrogant? You just enjoy this. You're not capable of either comprehending or enjoying anything else other than this. How is that helpful to maintaining the state of bliss in Eden? To dangle the happiness of angels in front of them and not to speculate. Seems a little incredible to me. But so Raphael's communication to Adam and Eve includes this warning that it is possible for them to lose their status, even in Eden, through an act of disobedience. Adam asks him to elaborate on that. That seems simple enough. Please elaborate on how we might screw this all up. Raphael says, well, God made thee perfect on line 524, but not immutable. You're perfectly free to fall. You're free to lose God's love and to disobey him. God wants this to be the state of things because it's no fun to have you serve him without being able to fall. That way, your service is free. It wants to be freely given for you to love God. And let's look at this line, 529. I'm going to unscramble this. God requires our voluntary service, not our necessitated service. I think you could do an entire lecture on this line alone. God requires our voluntary service. Does Raphael hear himself? How can you require something voluntary? God requires our voluntary service? It's a weird, paradoxical way to say it, isn't it? But even worse, this is the second part that bothers me about this line. How does obedience to that rule prove anything? I'm sorry, my understanding is that they thought if they ate from that tree that they would die. So this God is going to interpret obedience with that rule as free and voluntary? That seems amazing to me. How does that prove heartfelt obedience, that two people do not break a rule that carries with it a capital punishment? That proves their sincerity? I don't see how a God could think that way, could think that because they do what they're told, that means they love him. Seems to be incredibly bad logic. And Adam says this, further issues to me. You have to think about this line 544. After Raphael is done talking to them, what Adam says is, thy words, attentive and with more delighted ear, divine instructor, I have heard, than when cherubic songs by night from neighboring hills aerial music send. What the hell is this? So, in the middle of the night in Eden, they're hearing cherubic songs from distant hills during the night. Are they supposed to be hearing this? This isn't elaborated on. Or is Adam hearing the voices too, so to speak? It's not just Eve having the dream. In the middle of the night, Adam is being exposed to cherubic songs from neighboring hills. What are those cherubic songs? And why does Adam feel the need to say to Raphael, you know, that was better than those songs? What is it? He's trying to assure him. It's as though he has another stance. There's another idea that's being whispered in his ear, other than the one Raphael is saying. Isn't that what that kind of implies? Cherubic songs by night? What are those? They are that is not expounded upon. So then Adam asks him to keep going. And line 555, if thou consent. Adam is desirous to hear more, he says on line 55. More desirous to hear, he says. The full relation, which must needs be stranged. This is interesting. He's asking to know what he's not allowed to know. And he wants the full relation. He says, don't you hold anything back. I want to know everything. And it's interesting to me, Raphael seems to agree that maybe he shouldn't tell them, even though he ultimately does. Line 569. He's going to unfold the secrets of another world. Perhaps not unlawful to reveal, he questions. Perhaps not unlawful. Who knows? I might not be authorized to tell you this. Which brings us right back to the idea. And I think now is as good a time to pose this question. What is the tree of knowledge of good and evil? It clearly can't be a literal awareness of evil, because Raphael is about to tell him all about it. Raphael's about to tell him the whole story about about Satan, the rebel angels, and the rebellion in heaven, and he's going to relate to him precisely Satan's arguments. He's not going to hold anything back. Adam's going to be fully appraised of the situation. And how nice is Eden if they're supposed to know, and they're allowed to know, that their very paradise, is a battleground between good and evil spirits? And that Satan can just get in there, and they have to look out for him? How do they feel about that? So how can the tree represent knowledge of good and evil? They haven't eaten from it, and they're about to be told all about good and evil. So now we're going to get the story about why the war in heaven even happened. And Raphael, in continuing, he begins. It started with an act of nepotism in heaven. Now think, if you're Eve and you're the submissive person in the Garden of Eden, how do you think she's feeling about this story? It starts with an act of nepotism. Line 603. God says, this day I have begot whom I declare my only son. And continuing on to line 606, your head, him I appoint. So that means on the same day that the Son of God is born, he's given command over all heaven. He's elevated day one from the day he's born. And after this elevation, there's a huge celebration with music and all the rest, just like we had heard back in book 3. Huge celebration, but Satan is not pleased. And Satan begins the rebellion at midnight. It's in the middle of the night, just like Eve had just been awakened in the middle of the night. So similarly, Satan, by the way, he wakes his companion in the middle of the night. Line 673. And this is supposedly his second in command. Milton doesn't say Beelzebub, but we might assume. So what, are these two a couple? He wakes his companion. Now, we know from book 1, line 423 of book 1 says that spirits, when they please, can either sex assume. So spirits can, for the purposes of coition, for the purposes of sex, angels can just change genders and do whatever they want. So Satan seems to be in a kind of relationship with whoever this companion is. And as they convene to have this conversation, to instigate the rebellion, God knows that they're having this conversation, and God says to the son, we better get ready to defend ourselves. He knows this is taking place. And the son says something very interesting right back to him. Thou thy foes justly hast in derision, and secure laughest at their vain designs. This is a very ambiguous sentence. I think its primary meaning is supposed to be that thou, meaning God, is who justly has his foes in derision. Thou derides thy foes. And that you're laughing, that God is laughing at the vain designs of his foes. But it could just as easily have been, thy foes are the noun, are the main subject. And that the word derision is directed at thou, God. It could just as easily be interpreted that way. And if it is interpreted that way, then what the Son of God is saying is, your foes justly have you, God, in derision. This sentence can very easily be manipulated to say that, as can the next sentence that we see. 7:39. Now, again, talking about the foes. When they see all regal power given me to quell their pride. This can be interpreted two ways. All regal power given to Jesus to quell their pride. Now, the point being, because the next sentence is, and in event, know whether I be dexterous to subdue thy rebels. So what his seeming point is, again, the primary meaning of this is that all regal power has been given to Jesus to quench the rebellion by force. And that these foes are going to realize that their designs and tumults are all in vain, because Jesus has been given so much regal power to quell them. There's another interpretation of this sentence, however, when they see all regal power given me to quell their pride. This can be interpreted another way, and that is that Jesus is suggesting that the reason for his own elevation was to rationalize God's elevation of Jesus to deal with a pre-existing state of pride. And that the reason God placed Jesus ahead of all the other angels was to quell their pride. And then Raphael says to Adam, as if to say, just in case you don't see how this applies to you, Adam, let me just tell you this. The mighty regencies in their triple degrees, and by these regencies, he's referring to the people who sided with Satan prior to the war in heaven. Those regions, and this is line 750, regions to which all thy dominion, Adam, is no more than what this garden is to all the earth. Why would Raphael say that to Adam? Just in case you want to know how this all applies to you, their portion of heaven was about kind of like your portion of the earth here in Eden. And if that's not enough to sort of place Adam in the story, how about the mere mention of the fact that there's this whole world out there? How's Adam supposed to think about that? Why would they even stay in Eden? There's a whole world, a whole earth that apparently is not paradise. That's just out there. He just wants to let Adam know that. Just by the way, you want to know how small these people are. That's how small you are. That's how small your portion is compared to the rest of the earth. That's great. And I think this might be the only, I don't know this for a fact, but line 760, the palace of great Lucifer, so called that structure in the dialect of men interpreted. So I think that might be the only reference to Satan's heavenly name, Lucifer, when he was an angel. And so I need to talk a little bit about what Satan's actual logic is for this rise. And I think these lines are pretty Pretty popular, I would imagine, for any class that's on that relates to Paradise Lost, and it looks like it's 792. Orders and degrees. When he says orders and degrees, he means hierarchies, as in orders. Some people are placed above you, their degree's higher than yours. They're of a higher order. Jar not with liberty. Now again, for some reason people seem to think what he's saying here is that hierarchies, the existence of the hierarchies, does not jar with the fact that you can call yourself call yourself free. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that the mere fact that we have been ordered and the mere fact that we are parts of a hierarchical structure doesn't mean that our rightful place is to serve. Orders and degrees jar not with liberty, but well consist. Who can in reason then assume monarchy over such as live by right his equals? What gives him the right? And so to roughly sum up what Satan's argument is that superior force is not a right, and superior force is the only thing God has. Reason's not on his side. Only superior force is. And we mean to test that force, is what Satan says, and we're going to. Orders and degrees jar not with liberty. We have the same right to liberty as everybody else. We have the right to live as his equals. If in power and splendor less, in freedom equal. That's line 797. Who can introduce law and edict on us, who without law err not? We don't do anything wrong, and he's going to pass laws over us. Now there's a certain angel, Abdiel, who comes there, and he makes a series of arguments saying that the Son is just an offshoot of the Father, and so they owe him their allegiance just because of that. Satan rejects it. There's more to talk about there, but that wasn't the point of this podcast. And so, the war in heaven is about to begin.